Hey, would you like to ask your ancestors a bunch of questions? Wouldn't that be cool? I don't know, like 80 questions. Wouldn't that be even greater? Well, guess what? The Southern Claims Commission did just that in the post-Civil War era. And you might have had an ancestor that actually made a claim. So we're going to learn today about the Southern Claims Commission with Christine Cochran. But before we do, I want to introduce myself. My name is Connie Knox. I am a lifelong genealogist, here to help you go further, faster, but factually with your family research. Before we jump into that interview, I want to remind you to subscribe and ring the bell so that you get notified each and every time I upload a video. Now, these Civil War records are great records, and not only are they great for the fill in the gap between the 1870 and 1880 census, but they talk about the Civil War era as well, and they talk about a bunch of relatives that they had in their family. So this could be a gold mine for you. And not only that, but these records are also good for African American research. Now, this is a footnotes episode, and I call them footnotes because it's in the footnotes where the real resources are. And today's real resource is Christine Cochran. She is a professional genealogist out of Colorado, and she's going to tell us all about the Southern Claims Commission records, what we can find, where we can find it, and a great story, a really cool story, about an ancestor that she found in those records. So we're going to get to that interview right now. I want to welcome you to Genealogy TV. I really appreciate you joining us today. And you've got something special to share with us about the Southern Claims Commission.
I do.
Tell me about it.
Well, the Southern Claims Commission was established after the Civil War to allow people who lived in certain southern states and who had been Union loyalists to be compensated for property that they had either donated to the Union Army or had confiscated from them during the war.
You know, there are so many Civil War records that are available, but yet it seems like we're always having a hard time finding them. So tell me, what kind of information can we find in these records?
That's one of the things I love about these records. There's all kinds of things in these records. First of all, let me give you a little bit of background.
Mm-hmm.
For a person to have been eligible for a to file a claim with the Southern Claims Commission,
right,
prove that they had in fact given something or relinquished some of their property to the Army during the Civil War. They had to prove that they were Union loyalists, that they had never fought on the side of the Confederacy, and they had to prove that they had never been recompensated for that property. So in order to do that, the commission that was formed put together a list of 80 questions. I mean, it's a long, long list of about 80 questions. The claimant had to fill out his claim plus answer these 80 questions. And then they had to provide at least 3 witnesses. Each one of those witnesses had to answer all 80 of those questions. Remember, not everybody could read and write back in those days. So oftentimes it was somebody from the commission who was actually sitting down and reading through all 80 questions and recording what their answers were. So all 3 of these witnesses, and there were usually more than 3, had to come forward. And basically what they were doing, they would take those 80 questions that they had collected, and then the commission would take them away and sit somewhere separately. And each person was asked separately, so they couldn't be colluding while they were answering these questions. And then the commission would take the answers to those questions and sit down and look them over and decide whether or not that it was a valid case.
So of those 80 questions that form, is that the record that we can find?
Yes. So what you'll find is all stored at the National Records, NARA. And you can also access them on ancestry.com and Fold3. Now, those 2 are paid subscription services. I believe you can look, there is a master index that they've used. So there were 3 types of claims that are out there. They are, I guess what you would say, accepted claims, barred claims, and non-accepted claims, I guess you would say. Barred claims mean that the person never came back with the sufficient evidence to support their story. The allowed claims were paid out, but not usually at the amount that the person had requested. So you might request $350 for reimbursement, and you listed out what it was you wanted to be reimbursed for and how it ended up coming into the hands of the Army. And they would review that, and they'd look at what the market prices were then and the market prices were now, and then they would pay you. So it was kind of like you would always ask for something that was a little bit higher than what you really wanted, because that's kind of how bartering and trading normally goes. But the interesting thing is that there's an index, a master index, that has the allowed, the barred, and the disallowed, all of them there, with the names of the people and what their status was, and where the state that they filed the claim in. Now, the interesting thing is that you'd wonder, okay, do I need to just look at the allowed? Actually, all three of them have the information, all kinds of information. Even if they didn't get paid out, they were disallowed or they were barred, there was still a lot of information that was submitted. Now, the other interesting thing about this, so what you're going to see in there is people coming forward and giving testimony. So the first few questions that are going to be asked are, what is your name? What's your age? Where do you live? How long have you lived there? Did you live there before the Civil War? I mean, right there, we've got quite a bit of information. How do you know the claimant? Are you related to the claimant? And a very important question was, do you have any financial gain in the outcome of this? Okay, so if you were related to the claimant, you would say so. If you were just a neighbor, you were not related, you would say that. I lived next to him. And how long have you known the claimant? And so there was a lot of information just right there. And
seems like a loaded question, though. Do you have any financial gain from this? Well, of course you do.
Yeah, well, the claimant had financial gain, but the people that were witnessing for him,
okay,
had to say that they had no financial gain. And the interesting thing was that one of the questions that was asked was, did any of your relatives support the Confederacy? Mm-hmm. Now, that's a pretty loaded question. When you think about it, there were brothers fighting against brothers in that war. I mean, that was a horrendous war in terms of tearing families apart. And there's one example of this guy that I want to show you that had the claim for, he came forward and he asked for a mule, 175 pounds of bacon. He'd had a mule taken by the Army, and the first time they came through, they took 20 to 30 pounds of bacon, and then they came back later, and it appears to have been the same day, on a day that he wasn't at his farm, and took another 150 pounds of bacon. So wow. Testimony of himself being there. It was taken during the day. They always asked, was it taken during the day or the night? Because they want to know, how clearly people were seeing things. But now so you've got all of these witnesses coming forward saying, I'm the nephew of so-and-so. I've known him all of my life. And I've always known him to be a Union loyalist, or I'm so-and-so, I'm the person's neighbor. We are not related. And I happened to be on the farm there that day with him when they came and took the 20 to 30 pounds of bacon. And the other person saying, I am so-and-so, related to him through such and such. And so as you can imagine, you start getting into some of these letters and reading these letters of people doing this, and there is a lot of information in there. In the example I'm going to show you, it actually listed out 16 different persons of interest to this particular client that I was researching for.
That's amazing, and I'm so glad to hear. That was one of my questions, was, are the relationships listed in there? Now, are some of those relationships family members, or are they just neighbors or people that happen to know them?
Yes, both. So what you're going to get is not only family members and how they were related to the person, the claimant, but they're also going to be the family group, friends, associates, neighbors. There's going to be all kinds of people in these records. I think in the example that I was going to show you in just a little bit, there were 4 relatives by blood, and I believe there were 4 or 5 relatives through marriage. So they weren't married by blood, but this gentleman's sister had married into this family, and they lived in that area with that family, and they were coming forth to testify on his behalf. So all of a sudden, you know, you've got this tree, and you're thinking, well, you know, I know that there were the people named Kitchens over here, and I know there were these people named Williamsons over here, but how did they relate? How did they know each other? And then all of a sudden, boom, 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 you start seeing this tree just fill in. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to see.
I love it.
You're a genealogist. I mean, you're just like, this is ding, 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 ding. There's the pot of gold right at the end of the rainbow. And another really interesting thing about this 80 questions is that there are a couple of questions that are specifically for quote unquote colored people.
Okay.
If you're colored, you have to answer this question. And those questions include, were you a slave at the beginning of the Civil War? If so, who owned you? What was his name? Where did you live?
Right.
Do you own land now? Where did you get the land? Did the land come from the person that used to own you? I mean, there's all kinds of fascinating information there if you're looking for African American information on somebody around the Civil War, and potentially the opportunity to say, you know, there's that connection. That's who this man or woman or child belonged to at this time. I mean, so I think particularly for the African American culture here in the United States, that's a wonderful tool.
I was noticing in your slides, which I know we're going to get to in just a minute, that I was looking at the map, which I believe came from Family Search. The map that shows all the states, basically from West Virginia, North Carolina, on down the East Coast, all the way over to Texas, across the Gulf states, and then I think it included Arkansas and Tennessee.
Yes,
that right?
I can't remember the number. I'd have to go look at the slides again, but I think there were 10 or 12 states.
A good chunk.
Excuse me?
I said that was a good chunk of real estate there that those commissions.
Yeah, but it was only those states who could file a claim. Now, the interesting thing is, inside these NARA records for the Southern Claims Commission, there are also records for claims pre-Southern Claims Commission establishment and post-establishment. So that's really nice because they weren't necessarily following, you know, doing the 80 questions and all of that, but there's even more records than just in that short period of time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Well, let's jump over to your slides and show me what you want to show me.
Okay, so one of the interesting things here is just to know the dates. That it was the Southern Claims Commission was organized under President Ulysses S. Grant, and it was in existence from 1871 to 1880. So some of those slides some of those records I was telling you about earlier, they actually even have pre-1871 and post-1880 documents in the NARA records. And I think I've already talked to you about what it was. There's the map we were talking about earlier, and it was these 12 states. Now, this is an interesting slide because it gives you some numbers around what you can expect out of this set of records. There were 22,298 claims made. Only 32% of those claims were allowed, which equates to 7,092 records.
That's amazing.
Yeah, 68% of them were disallowed, meaning 15,206 of those records, there were no-goes. They were either barred, meaning you didn't provide us enough information, or they were just disallowed. They said, no, for whatever reason, we determined that you were a union sympathizer at one time, or maybe you weren't telling the truth about the property, or you were already paid for this at some point in time. So when you look at that, so you're looking at 22,298 claims, and you think, which of those applications is going to provide a rich source of genealogical information? And the answer is, yay, all of them. Wonderful stuff. There's the indexes will give you things like commission number, office number, report number, the year the claim was filed. This is just talking about that you had what the claimant had to prove, that they were a loyalist, they were a resident of one of the approved southern states, they never supported the Confederates, they owned property that was given or confiscated by the Army, and that they had not been reimbursed for it. They had to provide at least 3 witnesses, The witness had to have no monetary gain from the outcome of this. And each of the claimant and each of their witnesses had to answer 80 questions in an interview separately. And then the commission would review that application and the testimony and decide whether or not that person was going to be reimbursed. This is the standing interrogatories. This is the 80 questions. Now, I can't even get the whole thing. That's like the first 16 questions. So you can imagine how long. This was a long sheet of questions they had to answer. So this is the first 3 or 4 questions of the standing interrogatories. What's your name, your age, your residence, and how long has it been such, and your occupation? What genealogist doesn't want to know that information, right? Number 2, if you are not the claimant, in what manner, if any, are you in the claimant? Or do you have any interest in the success of the claim? No. Now this is interesting. This question will be put to every claimant except claimants who were slaves at the beginning of the war. That to me just really captured my imagination. And also it says if the original claimant was dead, these questions are to be put to each of the heirs or legatees, because some people were coming back and saying, you know, my dad served in the Civil War, he's gone now, but we had property, a farm that was taken or animals that were taken or something, and we want to be reimbursed for that. The third question asks, where were you born? If you weren't born in the United States, when and where were you naturalized? And produce your naturalization papers if you can. That's wonderful information, because
this looks like a goldmine of information.
Yeah, so some of these files actually have the naturalization papers there. Some of them actually have birth certificates or baptism records or anything that they could use to prove this kind of information.
That's amazing. If you go back for a moment to where we're talking about their residence, I'm wondering if there's enough information in there that a person could then go seek the land records.
Well, they actually have to describe the land. So they have to say this land was located in Bartow County, Georgia, along with such and such. You know, they have to actually provide a description of the land. So yes, I think the answer to your question is yes. I mean, they can't be reimbursed unless they can actually prove that that was their property at some time.
Wow.
So you'll even find land transaction records in these files.
Amazing. That's amazing. All right, very cool.
Then they talk about where they were residing and what your business was before the outbreak of the rebellion. Now, the reason why I think this question is so interesting, and where did you reside? What was your business from the beginning and the end of the war? And if you changed your residence or business, state how many times and why such changes were made. Now, understand that during the Civil War, our nation was in chaos. I mean, it was one of the worst disasters, if not the worst disaster this nation has ever encountered. Now, it solidified our nation. We went forward as a much, much stronger entity than we would have been either before that. Mm-hmm. However, we really paid a price. And during that period of time, families were shattered, lives were lost. Records, I mean, forget about it. You were trying to eat. You were trying to live. And, you know, people just disappeared. Nobody knew where anybody is. So, for instance, this one person that I'm going to show you an example of, he kind of just disappeared for several years and nobody knew where he was. And I'm going to tell you what happened to him because it's a really interesting story.
All right, we're going to take a break right now. And when we come back, Christine's going to tell us a little bit more about what's available for the African American community. Hey, I hope you're enjoying watching Genealogy TV. I just wanted to give you a quick tour of the website so that you could find things quickly. 2 areas that I find I go to the most when looking at a YouTube channel are videos and playlists. Clicking through to videos gives you a list of all the videos I've uploaded. Clicking on playlists groups those videos into categories that you might find interesting. For example, if you're interested in the DNA series or you're interested in photo restoration, all of those videos that I have created are grouped together for your convenience. Just remember that when you are looking at a video to scroll down and click on the Show More area. Showing More gives you those links that we talk about throughout the videos, and those are there for your convenience and helps you get to those record sets quickly. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you'd like to support Genealogy TV, you can do so at patreon.com/Genealogy TV. All right, we're back. So tell us, what is it that we have for the African American community in these records?
Well, I think this is a very exciting group of records for this reason. I mean, it is really, really a challenge for African Americans to be able to follow their lineage back and through the Civil War. This is a great resource. The following questions will be put to the colored claimants. Now, this is taken directly from that list of 80 questions I was telling you about earlier. 70. This is question 70. Were you a slave or free at the beginning of the war? If ever a slave, when did you become free? What business did you follow after obtaining your freedom? Did you own property before or after you became free? When did you get it? How did you become owner and from whom did you obtain it? Where did you get the means to pay for it? What was the name and residence of your master? Is he still living? Is he a witness for you? If not, why not? Are you in his employ now? Have you lived on his land or bought from him? Are you in his debt? What other persons besides yourself has any interest in his claim? That's a lot of information. That's one question.
That's like 20 questions in one.
I mean, that's wonderful.
That is great.
The second part says the following question will be put to all colored witnesses on behalf of white claimants. Were you formerly the slave of the claimant? Are you now in his service or employment? Do you live on his land? Are you in his debt? Are you in any way to share this claim if allowed? So that's quite a bit of information to be able to gather for an African American and for somebody who really, comes to this part of the Civil War where all of a sudden this relative vanishes. This is a wonderful way to be able to make that connection and go back a little farther.
Yeah. That, I'm sitting there thinking in relation to our census records, the next census would have been what, 1870? When I forget what the time frame was that these claims.
Let's see, I think the Southern Claims Commission went from 71 to 78. So I believe the next one was the 1880 census. Okay,
my mistake. I was thinking that it was earlier than that. Okay.
So, what's interesting about this is, the slave on the 1850 and 1860 censuses might have been named on the slave censuses, right?
Right.
And then 1890, we know those records are all gone.
Right.
And then
I was just trying to decide if at the time that this claim may have been requested, it kind of might be filling in a gap between census years, is I guess the point I was trying to get to. Yes,
you're exactly right. So how do you get these records? That's what everybody's going to want to know, right? Well, they're federal records, right? They're stored at the National Archives and Administration. They're under the Old Military and Civilian Records Unit at 700 Pennsylvania Avenue. And NARA actually has a way that you can go online. I find NARA a very difficult online resource to try to navigate, but you can eventually get to these records online. The best two ways to get to it is either through ancestry.com, which of course is a paid subscription. You just go in and put in under catalog keyword Southern Claims Commission, and you get loads of records. Also on Fold 3, which is also a paid subscription, you go to the home page, in your keyword search Southern Claims Commission, same thing. You're going to get a lot of records. Now, both of these, if you've got the paid subscription, you can actually access the records. If you don't, you have access to the index, the major index, but not the records themselves.
You keep answering my questions just before I ask them. So that was the next one was, what about the index?
Yeah, and now Family Search is a free database, and what I found there is that they have records about the Southern Claims Commission. In other words, they have books and things that discuss it, but they don't actually have the Southern Claims Commission records.
Good to know.
Getting back to, I think Ancestry.com is the best way to access it, and for anybody who doesn't know this already, most public libraries have a subscription to Ancestry.com. Now, you can get a free subscription you wouldn't be able to, you can access the indexes, but you can't access the records. But if you go to your local library and log in that way, you've got access to the records, and you can download or save whatever of those you want to a USB or print them out and take them home.
Another good point, because a lot of the libraries subscribe through their library services. So excellent point.
Yeah.
Wow, you're just full of great information here.
So this is an example of the card catalog. What you're going to see if you go to ancestry.com, you go to the search page, and you just put in Southern Claims Commission and hit search, and those are the 3 groups of records that they're going to have. The Southern Claims allowed claims, the Southern Claims Commission master index, which has allowed, barred, and disallowed, and then the U.S. Southern Claims Commission disallowed and barred claims. Now here on fold 3, the indexes are free, but the images of the documents are not. You have to pay a subscription for that. But basically, if you just go into the search bar and you put in Southern Claims Commission, hit return, you'll see what's returned there under 3 is Southern Claims Commission and barred and disallowed. The commission's approved in Alabama and approved in Georgia. Now I think that's interesting because they've got certain collections that you can get to. And if you look over to the right of the screen, you'll see sort of an example of some of those documents fanned out there. There's a lot of great information there.
All right, cool beans.
You notice over on the right side, it tells which database they found it in, Southern Claims barred and disallowed. It tells the name of the person, and it tells the number 4848. See, so there's Alfred Southern, number 48, actually was at, 4848. And then right below is John Southern, and his claim number was 18082. That's helpful if you want to go look for that on NARA.
I would also remind people to keep that timeline right there in the center of the screen. Keep that good and broad. Don't try and narrow down to just a couple of years, because you never know. You may end up filtering yourself out of a record if you get it narrowed down too tight.
And that's a good point too, because remember that there were also pre-Southern Claims Commission claims and there were post claims. So if you narrow it down to just when the Southern Claims Commission was in existence, then you might miss those post or those pre or post claims.
All right, good info.
Now here is it on Family Search. We do a search for Southern Claims Commission. And like I said, there's a lot of information about Southern Claims, but not the actual records themselves. Now, there are some write-ups on particular people that give really good examples of what you can get out of the Southern Claims. Andrew McAllister's claim before the Southern Claims Commission. So that's a very good example of a pre-Southern Claims Commission example.
Excellent. So let me go back for a second and ask you, because you said on the NARA website it's really difficult to get to, but if somebody really was adamant not to pay for a service, can they find the records, not necessarily the index, but the records at NARA for free?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good to know. I know I agree with you about NARA, though. That website, I mean, you could spend days in there and get lost.
It's really difficult. But then I was just showing here that on the Family Search, you can actually print out a catalog list of the documents so that you can go and take a look at them. Some of these documents you can actually see online through Family Search, and some of them you have to be at one of the centers to be able to view. So I think it always helps to capture a catalog print list. And then, if you go once a week, or if you go once every other week, or once a month, however often you can get to the local family history library, you've got your list there ready to go.
Amen. Or even if you are hiring somebody in Washington to, go look at, or one of the NARA,
Exactly.
locations to go, you can provide them with some information. It'll save you and them some time.
So I've got a case study here to share with you to give you an example of what I found for one person. I had a client whose third great-grandmother was named Artemisia Fountain. I love that name, Artemisia. That's actually a plant, an herb of some sort.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and here's what we knew about her. And I thought, oh, great, Artemisia, that's going to be such an easy name. You don't see that name very often. As a genealogist, you're like, yay, that's wonderful.
Never make assumptions.
Huh?
I said, never make assumptions. What you think's going to be easy is not always.
Exactly, because when you use an unusual name, you'd be surprised at how many different creative ways people have of spelling Artemisia. But here's what we knew. We knew from the marriage record that she'd married Jesse P. Fountain in Cherokee County, Georgia, and the date of their marriage. We knew, but not the parents of the bride, neither the bride nor the groom were provided on the marriage certificate. We did know that her maiden name was Williamson. Now, from the 1880 federal census, we knew that she was 60 years old in 1880 and the widow and the head of the house. So she was born about 1820. We knew also that she was living with her brother, W.R. Williamson, who was 64 and divorced, which is a very interesting entry for an 1880 census record. Not many people would have said they were divorced. They would have said widowed. They would have said, single or married and just not living with their spouse. That we knew that they were both born in South Carolina. Now, what we didn't know was what county in South Carolina they were born in. We didn't know where she died or who her parents were. We didn't know who his parents were either. So I went and took a look at the U.S. Southern Claims Commission Master Index because I knew that they had been living during the time of the Civil War. And there we are on page 205. There's Artemisia Fountain. She filed a claim in Georgia. Her claim number was 18155, and her claim was disallowed. They said, no, we're not going to give you whatever it is you're asking for. We also saw on page 647 that brother, W.R. Williamson, who filed in the county of Cherokee. Now, this is interesting. It says in the state of Alabama. That is a typo. The index was incorrect. But his claim was allowed. If you go over and you look, you see his claim was allowed. Well, that's a very close relative, so we have a very good chance of finding out some more about Artemisia. But we went and looked at Artemisia's file first, and unfortunately, this is all that was there. There was a folder that said, this is the office it was out of, this is the report number, this is when she filed it, this was her claim number. No more information found. We hit a dead end right there. So that was disappointing. However, when we found William's claim, 37 pages of documents. I mean, we just hit the jackpot here. Ding, 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 ding. It mentions Artemisia. It mentions his nephew, James Fountain. Gives testimonies of witnesses, neighbors, and friends. And it gives an account of William's movement during the Civil War.
Wow.
So this was, he filed for a mule and 175 pounds of bacon. Evidently, this was a very nice mule. This was a large mule. It was 15 hands high. So it was, my understanding is that it would have been 5 foot at its shoulders. It was a big mule.
Wow.
His claim was number 18153. He claimed $200 for the mule and $37.50 for 175 pounds of bacon. I'm just trying to get my mind around that. $37.50 for 175 pounds of bacon. That's a lot of bacon.
Yeah. You
Now,
know, I noticed that the claim number is 18153 and her claim number was 18155. I'm wondering.
She probably filed in the same office right after him. They probably went in there together.
And I'm wondering if that's why his was allowed and hers was not.
You know, they didn't say why hers wasn't allowed, so I'm not really sure. We have no records, so we don't really have any way of finding that out.
And what was their relationship again, him to her?
Siblings. They were brother and sister. He was her older brother.
Well, I can make all kinds of assumptions, but they would totally be without basis.
But it does get you wondering, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
That creative bent on the part of genealogists isn't necessarily a bad thing. You get that creative thought process flowing because you're trying to put yourself back in that day and age and time and think, well, now why wouldn't they have allowed hers and they allowed his?
Well, that's what a good research question's all about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's our curiosity that creates a good research question.
Exactly. And notice too on this form, he actually filed a claim for $237.50. He was paid $175. So he was disallowed $62.50. This wasn't uncommon.
I wonder if it was the price of
I
bacon
don't
that was the
know.
difference. I was trying to look.
I don't know.
They basically gave him $25. Was that a pound? What is that? Oh,
They gave
that's
him $25 for 175 pounds of bacon.
okay. I'm going to totally guess here that that might have been the difference in price of what he claimed it was worth and what they said it was worth.
Yeah, might be. I'm not sure how they determined that. He claimed a price of $200 on the mule, but was only paid $150.
Interesting. Good
Now,
stuff.
you
Good
know,
stuff.
that's what he expected to bring in from the market at that time or before the Civil War, and they made some adjustments. I don't know.
Still a lot of money for the time.
It was a lot of money for that time. So here's what we learned from the records. We learned that the client who I was working for, that her fourth great uncle was this William R. Williamson. He was the brother of her third great grandmother, Artemisia. We learned the birth location of William, which was a likely birth location of his sister Artemisia. We learned the names and relationships of family members not known before, and we learned the movements of this fourth great uncle during the Civil War. That's quite a bit of information.
That is a lot of good information.
Now, he did a really good job of answering one of the questions here, and I bring this up because I thought he did such a great job of answering this question. The question was, do you have any relatives who support the Confederate Army or who supported the Confederate Army? And he said, I have so many relations around here, cousins and whatnot. I really don't have any knowledge of what their political alliances are.
I wonder if he was a politician.
That is a smart way to answer that. In truth, he had many Confederate relatives. In fact, his nephew was a Confederate soldier. That was Artemisia's son. So he did know about that, but I thought that was a beautiful way of handling that question. And honestly, I think that's a fair answer to that question.
Yep. Yeah, and you know what? That was a good way to dance around it, but I see you have a new slide here.
I do. I just wanted to point out that these are the people that were actually discussed in this is the family tree, and these are all the people that were actually discussed there. I mean, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 family members right there. That's quite a bit of information for these folks.
That's awesome.
So what we found in the records were 1, 2, 3, 4 family members of William R. Williamson. His sister Artemisia, his nephew James, which is Artemisia's son, his nephew John, which is also one of Artemisia's sons, and Ransom R. Farmer, who he says is his second cousin. So when he testified, I'm Ransom R. Farmer, I am the second cousin of William R. Williamson. We didn't know that before. That was brand new information. So now, we can start working down the tree of Ransom and figure out how he and the Williamsons and the Fountains are related. And he had been a resident of Cherokee County, Georgia for 39 years. Yeah, that's great. He's going to be in the census records. He was there testifying to William's Union loyalties.
My head is just spinning with all kinds of ideas.
I know. I just love this record. Now here's relations that were mentioned who are related through marriage. So they're not blood relatives of Williams. He is related to these people through the marriage of his sister Artemisia. Remember, Artemisia is the client's third great grandmother, so these are blood relations of the client. Nancy J. Kitchens, Uriah Kitchens, and Lenora Kitchens. Now, a couple of these people we haven't actually found on the tree yet, but we've got names to go look for now, and we do have Nancy Kitchens. So now we've got more information, we've got more stuff that we can go take a look for.
That is just amazing. There's so many things that are popping up. I'm sitting there going, okay, now we can dig into the DNA side of this now that we've got more names. There's all kinds of possibilities.
I agree. You can start working those trees down to more immediate people who are living now and do a DNA. I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities there. Now, this is the fan group that was mentioned, Friends, Associates, and Neighbors of William R. Williamson. All of these people right here had either given testimony or were named in some way in his claim case.
You know, just for those who are not familiar with the fan principle of the fan club, that is cluster genealogy, and Elizabeth Shown Mills coined that term, friends, associates, and neighbors, and basically it's turning over the rocks of everybody that had any relationship to those people. I've talked about the cluster genealogy and fan club in several episodes now, and I'm trying to beat that drum because it is so important. It's probably one of the best strategies for genealogy is to really chase those friends, associates, and neighbors. I chase witnesses on documents and everything. It's amazing what you come up with.
I agree. And, you know, so many of these people, you know, that it's in this, the association they had, you know, one was his attorney who actually represented him in Washington, D.C. for this claim. Several of them were names that were given as Union loyalists and big Union leaders that William knew. Others were given as names of people who would testify that William was a Union loyalist. I mean, there's all kinds of other records out there that you could start looking at just based on these names. So what we ended up being able to put together just from this record is a timeline for William R. Williamson during the Civil War. So we know that he was born about 1809 in Spartanburg District, South Carolina. So we have a likely place to go look for Artemisia's birth location too, because very likely she was born in Spartanburg as well. At least we have somewhere to start looking. We can get a feet on the ground genealogist out there and say, hey, this is what I'm looking for, and this is why I think it might be here. We know that in 1841, he lived near Cherokee County, Georgia. We know that in 1860, he began farming his own land near Cherokee County, Georgia. Where's the land property records for that? That would be a good place to start looking. We know, of course, that the Civil War began in 1861. And we know from the claim record that in November of 1864, William R. Williamson had to flee his farm under threat of his Confederate neighbors. Now, he never joined arms for the Union Army. He felt that he could not pick up arms against his neighbors. That was against his religious and personal beliefs. His neighbors did not feel the same way about him. He had to leave his house under threat of being harmed or even killed. So where did he go? You know, all of a sudden he disappeared. Well, he obtained work cutting wood for the trains in the Union Army. We find out he was in Cartersville, Georgia at that time. He went to Cartersville, Georgia, and the Union Army embraced him and gave him work and treated him well and gave him a chance to earn some money to feed himself. Now, he did, while he was there, actually give information on Confederates to the Union Army. He never raised an arm against them. You know, he never raised a gun or a knife or anything, but he did give information. So that's even more proof of his loyalty. And it looks like on 13 of June, 1864, that's when he first saw one of the Union Army soldiers came to his farm and took 20 to 30 pounds of bacon. Now, there's a lot of great information in that statement also. We know that the soldier was under the command of Colonel Wilding Regiment of the Cavalry for the Union. I mean, there's all kinds of information. We can check, was that regiment of the cavalry actually in that area at that time? He took a 30 to 40, I think I said 20 to 30, it was 30 to 40 pounds of bacon from William's farm and let him know that it was going to be used to feed the army, that the army had been on a long march and they had lost a lot of horses and they were hungry and they needed food. So
now that information, did that come from the Claims Commission records or did that come from other research that you did on the regiment?
The Claims Commission records.
Amazing. All right.
Yes. And William was present when that 30 to 40 pounds of bacon was taken. Later that day, that same day, the army came back and took 150 pounds of bacon and the mule, and William was not present at that time. So we don't know exactly what happened there because it says that in 1864 he left his farm. Then it says in 1865 he was there when they came and took the bacon. But then he's gone again and they came back and took a mule and more bacon. So was he
He could have taken a walk down to the local creek, you know?
Yeah, was he coming by to check on and saw what happened? I'm not sure. You know, it's kind of vague around that. But evidently the commission thought that was viable. So, because they approved the claim in the end. In 1865, the Civil War begins. So, I'm sorry, ends. So he was pretty close to the end of the Civil War when all of this property was taken from him. So then we know in 1871, the Southern Claims Commission was established by the Congress, okay? So how much time has passed here? 65, about 6 years?
Yeah, I was going to say, since it actually was taken from him, almost 7 years, yeah.
Yeah, so 6 years later, this commission is established by Congress, and then he applies. Now this is interesting. The dates are very fuzzy in the records about this, but it appears that he applied in October and was denied by the Southern Claims Commission initially, saying that the claim was too small. So what I'm wondering is, you know, they're doing this for the first time. This commission is coming in for the first time. You know, they've never had a Southern Claims Commission before. They're probably having to feel their way through this and correct the process as they go, right?
I wonder if he went back and beefed up his claim so that it got approved the second time.
There's no record to that. The only thing I ever see is that mule and 175 pounds of bacon. Did he maybe go initially and ask for the 30 to 40 pounds of bacon back? And they said, no, that's too small of a claim. And then he came back and asked for 150 pounds of bacon in the mule. That makes sense. It appears to have been the same lawyer that represented him both times. So maybe the lawyer learned and said, you know, that didn't work, and I've seen some other claims that are going through for this, so let's do this. I don't know.
Well, and you may never know for sure.
Yeah.
You certainly have a great story here.
It is a great story. He does finally get Congress's approval on December 13th, 1878. Now, another thing to look at there. So this man is born in 1809. The Civil War starts when he's 56 years old. This man was an old man by that time. Now, by our standards, 56 is not that old. It's middle age right now. But in those days, he's old, right? People didn't live as long. By the time he gets paid, he's 69 years old.
That's, well, I guess for the time it wasn't that unusual. But
that's like 44 years after the property was taken from him.
Wow.
And I'll say, too, that I say taken. It wasn't exactly confiscated against his will. He says several times he was glad to give it.
Helping support the cause, maybe?
Glad to be able to support the cause. But he was an old man. He needed some money. So, you know, it's a fascinating story. So here's sort of a summary of what we ended up learning from this Southern Claims Commission's records. Persons of interest is what I call them. So that's the Elizabeth Shown Mills, friends, associates, neighbors, the clusters. We had 4 blood relations named, 3 relations through marriage, 9 friends and neighbors and associates named. We had a total of 16 people named in relation to William. Now, his sister was living nearby, so she likely knew all of these people, and well, Artemisia. We have an account of William's movement from 1841 through 1878. We know his year of birth and the county he was born in, Spartanburg District, South Carolina. We know that was probably Artemisia's likely place of birth. Might not be. Family might have moved. There's 4 years difference between the age of these siblings, but we know that they're the same family, and we now know that the names of the parents of Artemisia. So Artemisia is the 3rd great-grandmother of this client. The client now knows the names of her 4th great-grandparents. That's a lot of information. That's wonderful stuff.
That's like hitting the gold mine right there.
Yep. So this is just a list of the sources, the ancestry.com, fold 3. The Family Search Wiki page has a page that covers Southern Claims Commission. That's a very good one to read through. Family Search has some online images of the records of the commission claims, but they're not indexed. The National Archives and Records Administration, record group number 217 is where these records reside in Pennsylvania.
I will put those links in the show notes down below. People just need to click on the show more, and
Right.
I'll have those links there for them.
And this is a very good book for reading. The Southern Claims Commission, A Source for African American Roots. This is an article in the Ancestry magazine dated August 1999 by Reginald Washington on page 30.
Nicely done.
Isn't that great?
I mean, you know, you opened my eyes, because I mean, I've horsed around in those records a little bit, but I've not been able to find something like that. But that's amazing. I'm going to go back and dig into those records now too. I'm impressed. Nicely done. Beautiful. Well, I learned a lot. Thank you so much. If people want to learn more, I will put some of those show notes, put those links in the show notes for everybody to find. If they want to find you, how do they do that? I know you have a website.
That was actually the last, www.ourprovenance.com. It's OURPROVENANC, because your provenance is our provenance. In other words, searching your family history, I'm actually researching our family history, because we're all related somewhere down the line. That's why I'm excited about this.
Oh man, that was an eye-opener, and I am so glad you shared that with us. And we'll have to get you back on here soon, because you gave me about 5 different subjects, all of which I thought were really fascinating, but this one caught my eye first. So we're going to have to do this again soon.
Good. I think the other one you were interested in was Anton Wood, who was the youngest prisoner in the Colorado State prison system around the turn of the century, and that is a fascinating story. He was sentenced to a maximum security prison down in Canyon City. That's a great story.
Well, I'm up for it if you are.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll do it again. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, wasn't that cool? I know I learned a lot. Thank you, Christine Cochran, for teaching us about the Southern Claims Commission records. Now, don't forget to check the show notes down below. Click the little show more button there, and it'll open up so that you can get to those links that we left for you there. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so that you get notified each and every time I upload a video. Until next time, thanks for watching Genealogy TV.